Hey everybody, welcome to video 3 in my Princess Zelda is not a damsel in distress series, and this is what I've been super stoked for, because we're going to talk about Ocarina of Time. Yeah, I'm so stoked. Now, we're going to start with a reminder of the definition I'm using, because for some reason, some people want to keep getting into fights of definition in the comments. Not everybody. It's been overwhelmingly positive, but some people want to fight about the definition. And then I'm going to do one bit of feedback because it keeps coming up in the comments, so I don't want people to feel ignored. So, the definition and why. A damsel in distress is a female character that is put into immediate danger, afraid for her safety, life, and or virtue in order to put the story in motion. Now, a damsel in distress must be a definition of exclusion, meaning the inherent innocence or helplessness of the damsel in question must be the plot motivator, not knowledge, special powers, or any abilities she has. Because otherwise, if we don't treat it as a definition of exclusion, the label reduces a female character to her gender in a way that a man would not be reduced and is therefore sexist. Now, that one comment I said I'd get to before diving into the meat of it. And I did find a way to tie this into the overall topic, so this is why I'm doing it now. People in the comments keep mentioning the Triforce's similarities to the emblem of the Hojo clan, a samurai family who controlled the feudal military government of Japan from 1203 to 1333. This period of Japanese history was known for two things somewhat significant to the Legend of Zelda series: some evolutions in the type of Buddhism practiced in Japan, and the successful defense against the Mongol invasions of Kublai Khan. From 1274 to 1281, it's the same military campaign that inspired the game Ghost of Tsushima. This very tumultuous period in history was heavily mythologized in samurai stories and Buddhist-inspired meditations on impermanence. And we can see the obvious foreign, we'll say, appearance of Ganon, or as he's referred to, Ganondorf, in Ocarina of Time. The Mongols in fantasy have inspired plenty of foreign invader races, including the Dothraki in Game of Thrones, and the orcs in The Lord of the Rings. I'm not going to moralize on that. I'm just going to report the facts. Now, the Gerudo, the race that Ganondorf comes from, are a desert people, and whether that's a reference to the Islamic factions within the Mongol Empire, or if the think piece is blaming the look of the Gerudo on copying Western Orientalism are correct, I think that the Legend of Zelda functions heavily on the rule of cool. And a desert biome just changed up the visuals in a period where they only had so many tools. We know that red-haired, tan-skinned people do not exist in nature without some sort of technological help. You do not get a tan with this hair color, okay? So, I think that too many attempts to connect these characters to real historical events or people, it misses the point on two fronts. One, obviously does not real. Ganondorf bleeds green. We'll talk about why later on. But Japanese entertainment media more often seeks to displace reality rather than some attempt to reflect reality. And all these think pieces on what the Legend of Zelda means are trying to cram it into a Western lens that just doesn't apply. Now, we know that the Legend of Zelda is pulling cultural aesthetics from other stories. Robin Hood, Peter Pan. I'll get more into that as we get into the analysis of Ocarina of Time. I want to use the Robin Hood reference to pivot to Maid Marian, because that's directly relevant to Ocarina of Time. Because Maid Marian, throughout major portions of the retelling of the Robin Hood myth, is often depicted as secretly tomboyish. She disguises herself as a page or another type of young boy character. This was a common trope in medieval stories because at the time they just saw no beard, higher voice, oh, must be a boy. They didn't assume it was a woman dressing as a boy because of assumptions that were made about women. On that note, let's get into Ocarina of Time. Bit of history. Ocarina of Time was originally released way back in 1998 for the Nintendo 64. It was the first Zelda game with 3D graphics, and it's an early example, very early example, of features such as a target lock system and context-sensitive buttons that are now staples of 3D adventure games. Some sources claim Ocarina of Time is the first game to introduce these features, but I wasn't able to confirm that, and that doesn't sound quite right to me. So maybe it's right, maybe it's not. It's not important. What's important was that Ocarina of Time was one of the most anticipated games in the 1990s. And that was in part because Nintendo was in one of those make or break financial moments that defined much of the company's history. The Nintendo 64 was really, really lacking in first party games. They had a Mario game and that was kind of it. And so Ocarina of Time was a big deal. The Nintendo 64 was going to sink or swim based on this game. Nintendo spent $10 million on the marketing of Ocarina of Time, which doesn't sound like much, you know, compared to the $145 million that they spent marketing the Barbie movie. But 1998, a video game, that was a lot of money. And this was after a year-long delay because Ocarina of Time was originally part of a planned shift from cartridge-based games to CD disc games that didn't quite pan out. And even though, you know, we know what happened, the game was successful, the launch wasn't without its bumps. Multiple versions of Ocarina of Time exist. They had to change Ganondorf's blood from red to green because realistic violence no bueno. They also had to remove a sample of an Islamic chant from a piece of music in the Fire Temple level. Nintendo had a policy of avoiding religious materials. Now, I put that in just as a cultural touch point so people understand why I roll my eyes when we get into this games have gone woke. There's always a tension between Eastern sensibilities and Western sensibilities when Japanese companies marketed in the Americas. And it's always been a bit fraught. And I put this in just for the point of history so that people going forward do not assume Western intentions in a Japanese company. It's very, very important to recognize, other than yes, they want to make money eventually, the same drivers are not there. Again, displace reality, not reflect reality. Now let's get to the success of the game. The fact that Ocarina of Time has been released on the GameCube, the Wii, the Switch, the 3DS handheld port. It's been released this many times because Ocarina of Time was masterful for the technology of 1998. It had everything for the standards of the time. Game mechanics, sound, cinematics, characters' facial expressions, improved draw distances, large, interesting boss characters, everything on every metric. This game just, pardon the pun, sung. And it had the absolute most badass version of Princess Zelda to date, and a version of Impa that was seriously swole. The first glimpse of Zelda we see in Ocarina of Time is from a mysterious flash forward in Link's childhood. We see a brief image of Zelda escaping Ganondorf's on horseback. Link later meets Zelda in recognizable form when he arrives at Hyrule Castle after an extended tutorial where he's informed of impending catastrophe by the dying Deku tree. But we don't call it a Deku in distress. See what I did there? And note, big point, point number 1. When we first meet Princess Zelda in Hyrule Castle, she is not immediately imperiled. Point for her to be a damsel in distress. Now, what Princess Zelda is having is prophetic dreams. And these dreams have told her that Ganondorf plans to steal the Triforce. Dun, dun, dun. This gets a little muddled as the game goes on, but let's just roll with it, okay? Princess Zelda sends Link on a quest. Link is under orders. He doesn't come up with this himself. He's given a mission by Zelda to collect the spiritual stones from the Gorons and the Zora. Now, Link succeeds in collecting these spiritual stones, but in a twist that's become a common trope in Zelda games, dun dun dun, he returns too late to stop Ganondorf's initial attack. And this is where we see the full scene of Impa and Zelda escaping on horseback, where Zelda throws the titular Ocarina of Time into the moat as she passes Link on the drawbridge. This is intended to give Link the power to enter the Sacred Realm and retrieve the Triforce. Again, note, at this point, Zelda is not captured or a helpless victim, and Ganondorf isn't after her so much as the Ocarina. Now, I also want to stick a pin in that trope I mentioned about Link failing to stop Ganondorf's attack, okay? Because, like I said, this trope becomes a central pillar of the Legend of Zelda series. TV Tropes calls this the failure hero. And the failure hero is so linked to Zelda that if you look at the TV Tropes page on it, you get a Legend of Zelda series reference. Now, Link isn't exactly a textbook failure hero like the playable character in Spec Ops The Line, Disco Elysium, or Far Cry 5. But Ocarina of Time is the game wherein the canon Legend of Zelda timeline splits into 3. Now, we didn't know this at the time, this has come out later, but the Fallen Hero timeline, meaning the timeline where Ganondorf defeats this Link, who is referred to as the Hero of Time. Link is a failure hero in this timeline, and this is the timeline where all Zelda games to this point took place. And not only were all the games I've covered in this series so far in this timeline, but Oracle of Seasons, Oracle of Ages, A Link Between Worlds, and Triforce Heroes are also all set in this timeline. Now let's compare the number of games here to the number of games in the other timelines. Another timeline is the child timeline. Now this is the canon ending in Legend of Zelda where Zelda sends Link back to his childhood. This is the timeline of the direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, and Four Swords Adventures. So 3 games in the timeline that takes place Link's life after he goes back to his childhood years and then lives on his life as Zelda says where he belongs. Then you've got the adult timeline. And that's where the Hero of Time, that Link, has disappeared from the world because he goes back to the child timeline. And that's where Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and Spirit Trackers take place. Now, do you notice how many games are in the original Fallen Hero timeline, which is original fail? Notice how many games are there as opposed to the other 2? Now, time loops are not exclusive to Ocarina of Time. We'll get there with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. But if we are to treat Link the same way that analysis has treated Zelda, which is applying the most negative trope that applies 50 plus 1% of the time, instead of using a definition of exclusion principle like I am, well, that makes Link a default failure. That's the most common outcome for him, based on the Ocarina of Time. That's the timeline the majority of games are set in, but that's not fun, right? We don't want Link to be a failure. We don't want that outcome. Link should win, right? So people see Link as an aspirational hero and they give him the benefit of the doubt of, well, okay, it doesn't matter that most of the games are set there. He eventually wins an Ocarina of Time. Therefore, yay, victory. Link's an aspirational hero, not a failure hero. Some of you probably see where I'm going with this. Why do we treat Hero of Time Link so differently than we collectively treat Princess Zelda? Could it be because of the internalized sexist assumptions and competitive misogyny inherent to the most popular forms of feminist analysis? I'm asking, not telling. You might realize by this point that I'm dragging out this preamble. I'm doing a big roll up to the biggest not damsel in distress element of Ocarina of Time. Yes, I am savoring this like fine wine or a great single malt scotch, because this is where the cognitive distortions of many people emotionally connected to Zelda being a damsel in distress kick in. This is Sheik. Sheik is a badass. Sheik is also Princess Zelda, who has disguised herself for 7 years awaiting Link's return. There's a lot going on with Sheik Zelda. TV Tropes refers to the trope of a woman dressing as a man to accomplish a goal as the sweet Polly Oliver trope, but a much earlier example of this particular trope goes back to the Ballad of Mulan. You know, the thing that Disney films are based on. And then, of course, there's Maid Marian from Robin Hood. There's Éowyn in Lord of the Rings. That's an element the movie stripped out, but it is in the book. But there's another Lord of the Rings character that I want to focus on because she's got a lot more in common with Princess Zelda that tends to not get talked about. Galadriel. And I'm going to say Galadriel because I can't pronounce it the way I can't do it. Galadriel, okay? Galadriel is the one who banishes Sauron, as Zelda banishes Ganondorf. But they also share the fact that while they know how to find and wield the item of power in their respective stories, they don't pursue it themselves. And it's important to ask why. Galadriel will not touch the One Ring because she's too tempted by the power that it holds. Her wisdom holds her back. Frodo's relative innocence and humility are what allows him to remain under a certain threshold of corruption even while using the One Ring. And we see a similar dynamic with Zelda and Link. Ocarina of Time stresses that the wielder of the Triforce must have a heart where courage, wisdom, and power are in balance. If the wielder's heart isn't in balance, the Triforce will break into 3 parts and only one part will remain for the one who touched it, and that's the part that the wielder most believes in. Note that it doesn't say that one's heart must be the strongest in all 3 attributes, just balanced. Remember that Link in Ocarina of Time is barely out of childhood. He doesn't yet know what he doesn't know. So, he's more comfortable wielding elements of power than, maybe Princess Zelda is with the experience of all this time and failure and hiding for 7 years as a man. Yeah. Zelda's wisdom, like Galadriel's, has caused her to turn away from the lure of power. That's not her role. Now, we can connect a direct Lord of the Rings influence to The Legend of Zelda. We know that Takashi Tezuka, the writer of the first 2 Zelda games, was a fan of The Lord of the Rings. So it may not be an accident or coincidence that Zelda as mystic sage is a much more consistent classification than Zelda as mere damsel in distress, even before we get to Ocarina of Time. But Zelda also has that trickster quality to her that we see in characters like Maid Marian and Erwin. There's a subtle yet distinct cunning about Zelda, and the Sheik disguise is the clearest example of that, but all through tossing the ocarina as Ganondorf's chasing her. There's all this sleight of hand, being one step ahead, outwitting Ganon instead of overpowering him. We get into more obvious examples of trickster-like qualities as the series progresses. But I want to stop here because in Ocarina of Time, we're definitely getting the wisdom is superpower element of Princess Zelda front and center. They're not being subtle about it here. And that's missed by the analysts that refer to Zelda as a damsel in distress. Similarly, Link's youth and innocence tend to be overlooked as significant elements in his character, even though the creators literally dressed him like Peter Pan, the boy that doesn't grow up. Now, this is where that Hojo period in Japanese history may be relevant as not necessarily inspiration, but flavoring, right? There are precedents for trickster oracles, which is, sage plus trickster. We have trickster oracle. Zelda certainly has prophetic visions in multiple games now. The most notable example of a trickster oracle is actually Jacob in, call it the Old Testament or Torah, depending on your religion. The ancient Hebrews were defined by being a constant minority group living in a series of diasporas under the thumb of much more powerful peoples. The dreidel is a lingering symbol of this trickery. The dreidel was used to masquerade religious instruction as a form of gambling in plain sight. Tricksters in antiquity were seen as teachers. They also undermined fascistic power structures or totalitarian or tyrannical power structures. The fact that they've been reduced in popular culture to trickster as fascistic asshole with more of a gay coding than a traditional gender bending, that's a topic for another time. But relevant to Ocarina of Time, gender bending is a known trickster quality. Importantly, it's a subcategory of form bending, not a commentary on gender. Tricksters of numerous cultures are known for changing into animals and mythical beings as well, something that becomes really important in The Legend of Zelda as it goes forward. I'm going to put that aside, save it for other games, because I like keeping these videos under a certain time. I want to go back to be laser focused on how the hell anyone claims that Zelda is a damsel in distress in Ocarina of Time. I have researched this, and apparently the answer is that it's because she gets abducted by Ganondorf upon revealing her identity in the last act of the game. But that misses the twist in the ending. Never mind that we can name a whole bunch of characters that get captured or depowered as a humbling experience so they don't seem all powerful. And let's face it, in this game, she turns into a man. She outrides him. She's telling Link what to do the whole time. She sees the future. Zelda is pretty OP. So the fact that we go from totally overpowered Princess of Time, Space, and Death to damsel in distress in one flippin' move, I call bias on that one. And my nose is getting red because I'm getting worked up. Yes, in terms of gameplay, there's a final showdown, a fight between Link and Ganondorf. But there's two things going on here. One, in a Hand of Destiny trope twist, Ganondorf, Zelda, and Link, all being in the same place, unifies the Triforce because the Triforce is split between them. And then when Link does defeat Ganondorf, he does it tactically by reflecting his own power back at him with the Master Sword and then using his small stature to run between Ganondorf's legs when Ganondorf transforms into beast mode. He's basically using Ganondorf's over 9,000 quality against him. It shows that Ganondorf's lust for power is his true undoing. The sages, led by Princess Zelda, bind him in the Sacred Realm, Dark Realm. It's the same thing in this timeline. But they don't destroy him. It's like putting Zod in the Phantom Zone. And then Zelda blames herself for everything. Which, this tendency towards guilt and self-loathing might be why she's not able to balance her heart. It's an interesting character point. Now, it's very Japanese, but also, let's do close read as well as cultural relevance. Let's take a look at Link's commoner status in these games. He's just a guy. He's just, at the beginning, a boy without a fairy. Read into that what you will. I'm going to read in that it's much like Frodo Baggins' humble status as a hobbit. That commoner status in Tolkien root fantasy is essential to understanding why that character is the right person to carry awesome items of power. The whole idea is, as a small person in a big world, Frodo, Hero of Time Link, they're not caught up in the Game of Thrones, so to speak. He hasn't been corrupted by the politics. He's a small player in a much larger story, and that doesn't change just because it's told from his point of view. It's very clear in The Legend of Zelda, Link doesn't have all the information. In good playable character fashion, he does what he's told a lot of the time. And compared to Ganon, he doesn't have a huge amount of power, even at the end. What he has is the morality and courage of a common man with a mission. That little guy in a time of war. And the moral of the Legend of Zelda games, time and time again, is that common man's courage matters. It's what's gotten many cultures, but it's very, very, built up in Japanese stories, that, impermanence, that accepting of, well, we're just getting to the next period of peace. We know it's not forever because the next fight is for another set of heroes and sages. We just have to play our part. If you've gone through all this and you still think Zelda is a damsel in distress in Ocarina of Time, at least we can agree that Zelda was not intended to be a damsel in distress in this game. I don't see how you see it, but if you want to take that one thing and not see it as like Han Solo in Carbon Freeze, you want to define her entire character for it, that's your bag. I don't agree, but Zelda is the architect of the master plan, Master Sword, sage, trickster, and mystic. Link is just the point of view character. Link being the point of view character doesn't change Zelda's power ranking. She's doing a ton of stuff. I don't know what more she has to do to not be a damsel in distress in people's minds, but we're going to keep going because there's a lot more games. Next video, we're going to be looking at the child timeline, most notably the game Twilight Princess. Yes, Majora's Mask is an amazing game, but Princess Zelda isn't in it except for a flashback. We'll touch on Majora's Mask just to root it, but Twilight Princess is the one I really want to look at next time, in part because it's sentimentally one of my favorite Legend of Zelda games. I am not saying it is the best Legend of Zelda game. I'm just saying it's one of my favorites. Until then, if you liked this video, please help support this channel. Either become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or kick a one-time donation to either the Leanna Cares program, my peer counseling program, coffee.com/LeannaK. You can buy a one-time session for someone who can't afford it. Or you can donate to the startup for our men's group that is going to start early October. More on that once I finish this series. The GoFundMe link is in the description box, as well as the link to the gameplay footage that I used for this. Someone was kind enough to record the whole game, 13 hours of gameplay, and so I was able to get the videos I needed for this video. Check them out if you want to refresh your memory on one of the greatest video games of all time, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. Bye for now.